Ezra Pound's young artists and writers friends were killed during World War I. Ezra wanted to know why they died. Digging book by book, row by row, in the entire economics section of the Library of Congress, I found this little magazine with the Jekyll Island story in it. When I took that to Ezra Pound, he was so thrilled. It was the biggest discovery of his life.
In fact, Ezra Pound called the Jekyll Island story the biggest detective story of the 20th century. That they are responsible for 3 of the biggest tragedies of the 20th century: World War I, World War II, and the Great Depression.
Wars are very profitable. In fact, wars are probably the most profitable thing an international banker can be involved in. So consequently, throughout the last at least 300 years of North American and European history, you see incidents of international bankers backing both sides of a conflict.
They've been trying to have a war in Europe since 1885, but the central banks of Europe had already bankrupted all the nations of Europe. They had no money. The only money was here in the United States. In order to get that money, they had to put a central bank over on the American people.
It was sold as a way to bring stability to the American economy. Well, what happens just a little over a decade after the passage of the Fed? We see the biggest depression of this century in any case.
For the 16 months prior to the crash of '29, the Federal Reserve increased the money supply by 62%. Now, what was happening back then? Much like it's happening today. People were buying and selling, pledging and borrowing, thinking the good times would never end. And then at the time of the crash, they pulled the plug on the money supply, and the people who had pledged their stocks, their bonds, their homes, their cars, everything, they pledged their savings accounts, they lost it all.
Selling guns to one adversary while making loans to another is a common way these boys make their profits during war. And when profits begin sagging, people like Jacob Schiff, Max Warburg, and J.P. Morgan knew how to build them up again. Surprise, surprise, it's a documented fact that these fellows financed Trotsky and Lenin with billions in golden credit to initiate the revolution in Russia. With Russia out of the war and America in, the conflict was extended by at least another 2 years. 2 more glorious years of gun sales and wartime bank loans, upon which to earn interest for many more years to come.
There is no question that war is a profit-making business. After World War I, Senator Gerald Nye held very famous hearings here in Washington where he dragged in some of the biggest bankers and industrialists and put them on the spot and just examined profits that were made by some of these major interests. War is a profit-making business. Anybody who says otherwise is a liar or a fool.
They were able to manipulate us into World War I, and as a matter of fact, the war stretched out for at least another 2 years beyond what it would have gone.
Just when you think you're ahead of the game, someone changes the rules.
They did this knowing, with malice aforethought, to strengthen their own profits and to build their own institutions, their own banking institutions.
Many people believe that virtually all of the wars of this century have been caused for reasons to benefit small financial groups, those that move in the sphere of influence of the Bilderberg and Trilateral Commission.
For an example, the war in the Balkans right now. Who's been providing Milosevic with arms and weapons? The Soviets have. Who has been financing the Soviet Union, their military industrial complex? The United States has. European bankers have. So the bankers have been financing both sides of every major conflict. Conflict brings progress, but controlled conflict brings controlled progress. Every major war, every major conflict, arms sales, loaning money to governments. You get their people to pay you interest back into the coffers of the bank, money that you created out of nothing.
Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman claimed that the Federal Reserve caused the Great Depression by deliberately reducing the amount of money in circulation.
Depositors all over the country were frightened about the safety of their funds and rushed to withdraw them. There were runs, there were failures of banks by the droves. And all the time, the Federal Reserve System stood idly by when it had the power and the duty and the responsibility to provide the cash that would have enabled the banks to meet the insistent demands of their depositors without closing their doors.
Congressman Louis McFadden, chairman of the House Banking Committee during the crash, agreed, saying, "The Great Depression was a carefully contrived occurrence by international bankers seeking to bring about a condition of despair so that they might emerge as the rulers of us all."
There was a memo circulated in advance of the stock market collapse. All the big guys, or the insiders, let's say, got out of the stock market during that 4-year period. They all got out. They were cash heavy when the market crashed. They were able to buy up major corporations for pennies on the dollar.
Franklin Roosevelt's own son-in-law called the Depression the deliberate shearing of the public by the world money power, triggered by the planned sudden shortage of call money in the New York markets. Insider Joseph Kennedy's wealth grew from $4 million in 1929 to over $100 million 4 years later. Then, as now, America's press failed to tell us what was happening. These scenes of unrest in America have never been seen before. Cameramen would shoot them, but newsreels wouldn't play them. Controlling the news started early in America. Of course, the lighter side of the news continued to get lots of play.
And they're off. Around the first bend, it's Rumbleweed by a beat. Closing second, and Hop, Skip, and a Jump. Now coming around the turn is Fox Feather. Hop, Skip, and a Jump is ripped off. And Hop, Skip, and a Jump is down. Well, ladies and gentlemen.
Fortunately, populists from President Andrew Jackson to William Jennings Bryan to Father Charles Coughlin were courageous enough to speak the truth.
May I remind our President with all due respect that not one of these soldiers cast a ballot on that fateful Good Friday night in the spring of 1917 to force a peace-loving nation like ours to take up arms for the profiteers and the exploiters of mankind.
And during the Depression, no one was more dangerous to the banking interests than Huey Long.
We've tried the Republican Party, we've tried the Democratic Party, then we've gone back and tried the Republican Party, and now we're back trying the Democratic Party. And unfortunately, whenever we get into power with either one of these parties, we find that the one crying need of our people, the redistribution of wealth, so that none would be too poor and none would be too rich, is always neglected by the party that is in power.
How many men ever went to a barbecue and would let one man take off the table what's intended for 9/10 of the people to eat? The only way you'll ever be able to feed the balance of the people is to make that man come back and bring back some of that grub he ain't got no business with.